body of Christ, broken for the world. When we think about God, we think about his love for us, we think about how he desires to draw close to us, and we know and we believe that his presence is real and active in our lives. And we know that in a very beautiful and powerful way, he comes to us in this most blessed sacrament at the altar, this Eucharist that we come together to celebrate every week, this Eucharist that we celebrate even daily. And because God desires to be so close to us, because his presence is there very deeply in our hearts and in our lives, none of us should be surprised to know that we all have had encounters with the Lord. We all have had, in one fashion or another, the Lord speak to us, the Lord pull on the strings of our heart, the Lord try and draw us to himself, because he is alive, he is present, not only here in this altar, but everywhere. He desires to be with us, he desires to come to us. So we want to spend some time these next 3 days thinking about the Lord and how he comes to us, how he is present with us. My hope is that everybody, as you walked in, everybody should have received a purple folder. Is that right? Yes. Did anybody sneak in without getting a purple folder? Okay, good. If you need one of these, just raise your hand and one of our helpers will come around and give it to you. But I want to look at a couple things here briefly inside this folder. So one of the important things that's going to be present there is this little orange notebook and this little orange pen. And that's there just to encourage everybody to make some notes as you listen to different stories, as you have different experiences over the course of these nights. Make sure to take the time, write something down, write what it is that ever might strike you, because there is a way that God will be trying to speak to you through these evenings of this mission. On that right-hand side of the folder, you'll find 3 handouts there which go over each of the 3 nights of our mission. And the next 2 I'll talk about at the end, but the very first one here that talks about night 1, just to give everybody a little bit of an overview of what we'll do before we begin with song and with prayer before we enter into our testimonies. So you'll see on this text this prayer for the National Eucharistic Revival, which is another reason for this parish mission to reflect on the presence of the Lord in the Eucharist and in our lives, to draw us more deeply into his life and into his love. We get on the back side of that sheet and we see this idea that we have these personal encounters, that we have 5 different speakers who tonight who will share to us how they have encountered the Lord and how the Lord has been present and active in their own lives. Underneath that section you'll see there's different spots for different kinds of questions. So as our speakers are sharing their witness talks, are sharing their testimony, think about maybe some of these questions. Think about what it is that might strike you. Think about how it made you feel. Think about what most moved you in somebody's story. And then we'll also have opportunities to share with each other what has been most striking, most impactful to us. And so we'll have those opportunities. And then, of course, at the very end of this, right, as we hear these amazing stories of faith, as we hear about how God has worked in the lives of others, it should stir up something in our own hearts of what we desire as well from the Lord, what we are looking for, how we want him to work in our own life. And so towards the end of this evening, one of the things that you'll be invited to do is to write down, maybe on one of these sheets in this little notebook, and you can tear it out afterwards, but write down on one of these little sheets, what is it that you are looking for? What is it that you are praying for? What is it that is on your heart? How do you want to draw closer to the Lord? What is it that you are looking for from him? And at the end of the evening, we'll invite everybody to come forward and to place these intentions. We'll gather these intentions together in a basket. We'll leave them here. We'll use these throughout our nights of mission, culminating with the Mass on Wednesday, where we'll take these petitions, we'll present them to the Lord during that Mass as a way of offering God what is on our hearts, of being drawn closer to him. And we'll close with, finally tonight with this consecration prayer written by St. Peter Julian Amard, which is also being proposed to us as part of this National Eucharistic Revival. And we'll talk about some things that you can expect tomorrow night and on Wednesday night. At this time, what I'd like everybody to do is to please stand. We'll open our hymnals. I don't have the number.
Number 302.
Number 302, and we'll sing the first verse of gather us here. In the Blessed Sacrament. And so together we pray this prayer for the National Eucharistic Revival, which you can find and hand out for later. My God, I believe, I adore, I know, and I love you. I beg pardon for those who do not believe, nor adore, nor hope, nor love you. Most Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I adore you profoundly. I offer you the most precious body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, present in all the tabernacles of the world, in preparation for the outrages, tragedies, and indifference by which Jesus offended, and through the infinite merits of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and in the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I beg you the conversion of sinners. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I invite you now to please be seated and join me in welcoming forward for our first testimony, Jim Gustafson.
Hey everybody, can everybody hear me pretty good? Yes? Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Jim Gustafson, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to share my journey of faith story with you tonight. I would like to start out by saying that my mother-in-law was a long-term member of St. Julian Church for approximately 30 years. She was a spiritual role model for Lynn and I. She attended church regularly at St. Julian's Church and participated in bake sales and various other church events. Unfortunately, she had passed away a little over a year ago. God bless her soul. My wife and I have also been members of St. Julian's Church for probably about 23 years. My wife, 23 years, me probably 15 or 20 years. Lynn and I got involved in church, St. Julian's Church, as much as we possibly could. We were Eucharistic ministers for 10 years at St. Julian's Church. My wife and I were fourth grade catechists as well for about 7 years. We volunteered and participated in helping with some of the picnics that St. Julian's had, and we were also married at St. Julian's Church. Lynn and I have been married for almost 25 years now. In August it'll be 25 years. And August 14th. I always forget that date. That's how I am. I'm a knucklehead sometimes. Deacon Phil Entreveris was the one who married us. And after Lynn and I got married, we discovered that Deacon Phil had actually lived in the same subdivision as us. We would see him from time to time walking his dogs. And anytime he would see me, he would ask me if I was attending church. At that time I said, no, I am not. I'm not attending church at all. He kind of made me feel uncomfortable, to be honest with you, and after a while I would try to avoid him when I saw him walking down the street. What a jerk I was. Deacon Phil would end up playing an integral part of my spiritual journey as my story continues on. I was 24 years old then. Told my wife I wasn't going to get emotional, but he was a very powerful person in my life, and I miss him. I did not. So, at 24 years old, when I first got married, I did not have an interest in attending church at all. I had no understanding of who or what God really was. Unfortunately, God was not important to me, but God was important to my wife. She would always attend church without me. As time passed on, I recognized that I could not survive without God, and neither could my marriage. I would like to start out by making the affirmation that I have a compulsive addictive personality, and I will start off with my childhood. As a child, I never attended church, and I only went to church seldomly at Christmas or when somebody died. God was a mystery to me, and I didn't even really know for sure if God existed. My parents believed in God, but never attended Mass or practiced any kind of organized faith. I went to public schools, and they did not teach us about God there either. I was raised where God did not play a role in my life. As a kid, when something catastrophic happened, God always seemed to be blamed for anything wrong that happened. This attitude towards God went on until I was probably about 30 years old. And during my teenage years, I smoked, I experimented with alcohol, drugs, gambling, and sex. One of the best feelings that I felt was the feeling that alcohol gave me. I was addicted to alcohol from the start. Alcohol made me feel extremely comfortable and wanted by others. There was a euphoria that alcohol gave me. I was on top of the world, I thought. Alcohol and gambling were also very prevalent in my family. My parents took my sister and I to Las Vegas and Lake Tahoe. I went to Las Vegas several times as a child. There was one year we even drove from Chicago to Las Vegas, and that was a very, very long trip. My family loved to gamble. I also loved all of the action that was inside the casinos, the bells, the lights, and the women. I was in a fantasy world at a young age. My sister and I would go to the arcade rooms while my parents gambled. I really wanted to gamble instead, but I was not at legal age to do that. While in Vegas, my parents and my sister and I attended some of the shows. The women that were at the shows were dressed very provocatively. As a young teenage boy, this was extremely intriguing to me. I wanted my parents to move to Las Vegas. This was one of my fantasies at that age. I thought that would be awesome. My father is one of my best friends and also a big role model in my life. He is in the heating and air conditioning business and is very good at fixing anything that's broken. And so when I graduated high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do for a living or for a career. And at the age of 18, my father got me a job. He got me a job working at the same company that he worked at. And I had a career job at this point, and I could make something of myself. I really enjoyed doing the work as well. I enjoyed working with my hands. Unfortunately, most of the older men that I worked with drank alcohol and gambled. We would go to lunch and drink and sometimes never go back to the job site. That was 30 years ago. Some things were back then. It's not like that anymore. We would all go to lunch and drink, and sometimes not, I'm screwed up here. I had to go with them because I was the apprentice, and this went on for years, and this certainly fueled my alcoholism. I was still living at home with my parents then, and I was underage. My friends and I all had fake IDs as well, so we were able to go to the bars and drink. So I would go out almost every night, get drunk. My parents quickly became aware of the fact that I had an alcohol problem. They tried to get me to stop drinking, and they They even called the police to come to my house and talk with me. My mom told me I can raise you the best I possibly can, but if you don't want to stop drinking and clean up your life, you're not going to live in my house, which makes sense. So they also made me go to Alcoholics Anonymous. But I thought that program was not for me. Most of the people in that meeting were older than me, and I thought my addiction was not as bad as theirs, so I stopped attending. I was completely delusional. This did not stop me from drinking. My parents finally had it with all my nonsense and asked me to leave the house. They gave me a couple weeks to find an apartment. I was 20 years old. I found an apartment that was a few miles from my parents' house. I now had the freedom to do whatever I wanted to, and I thought that that was going to be great for me. A typical week for me involved gambling, playing poker at least 3 or 4 times a week, always with alcohol being served. I went to nightclubs and bars, smoked and drank and womanized, and all of those, I came to the realization that those 4 things, the smoking, the drinking, the gambling, the womanizing, all those 4 things were the things in my life that were killing me. I missed work because I was hungover. I was writing out checks for my gambling that I could not afford to pay. I was smoking like a chimney. I had girlfriends that I could not establish a relationship with. My life was completely unmanageable. After living on my own for about a year, I asked my parents if I could move back in with them, and my parents had said yes. I moved back in under a new set of rules. They did not want me drinking, and I had a curfew. And I also had to pay rent. I thought I had a new beginning at this point. I tried to quit drinking, but I couldn't. I still was drinking, smoking, gambling, and womanizing, and hiding it from my parents. I was a professional sneak. This behavior went on for 2 years, and then I met my beautiful wife. Excuse me. I met her at a dance club in Schaumburg, and it was love at first sight. She was so pretty and nice. We dated and hit it off very well. We were in love with each other, but I was still in love with drinking, gambling, smoking, and my other addictions. We eventually got married and moved into an apartment. We then bought a house in Elk Grove Village, and after being married for a few years, my wife was able to see right through me. She was able to see that I loved my addictions more than I loved her. My poor choices had caught up with me. I had 2 choices to make. I could turn to my addictions, or I could try to salvage my marriage, because my wife actually was giving me a chance to do that. So I chose to receive help. And I started somewhere, so I started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I needed to admit that I was powerless over gambling and that my life had become unmanageable. I also needed to surrender these defects of character to the God of my own understanding. And soon, after a year in Gamblers Anonymous, my sponsor recognized that I was also an alcoholic. Fortunately, I was able to stop drinking and smoking through the Gamblers Anonymous program. My life was getting better very slowly, and God was performing a miracle for me. I learned how to have fun and socialize without drinking or gambling, and my life was not dependent on it. A few years later, my wife came home from church and asked me if I wanted to attend a church picnic at St. Julian's Church. I was open-minded to it and said yes. The next weekend, we attended the picnic at St. Julian's Church. Deacon Phil was at the picnic and asked me if I was interested in going to the RCIA classes and to receive the sacraments. And I told him that I needed to think about it. I didn't tell him yes right away. So my wife, Lynn, eventually had persuaded me to go. So Lynn and I started going to the RCIA classes together. As I started going to the RCIA classes, I really started to learn more about Jesus. I learned that Jesus came to save sinners. Pardon me. I'm an emotional person, I apologize. I learned that that Jesus came to save sinners and that Jesus loved me more than anybody or anything in the world. And that gave me hope. And that gave me a lot of hope. I knew that my spiritual journey was just beginning, and that I had a very, 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 very long road ahead of me, and I still do. I was starting to convince myself that without God in my life was hopeless. The Holy Spirit was working a miracle in my life. This was another turning point for me. I started working my 12-step programs better, understanding who God really was. At the age of 35, my spirituality was growing. I now attended Mass every Sunday and became more involved in church. I finally became baptized at St. Julian's Church. I now was able to receive communion at church. Now I could be nourished by God. This was a completely new experience for me. I felt as though my relationship with God was closer now that I could receive Him in Mass. When I received the Eucharist at Mass, I would sometimes get emotional and remember the pain and suffering that Jesus endured on the cross. I remember that His pain and suffering was endured for my sins. How could anyone possibly love me more than that? The Eucharist continuously reminds me of the love that God has for me. Let me start this all over. The Eucharist continuously reminds me of the love that God has for me and the relationship that He wants with me. I also came to the realization that God was doing for me what I could not do for myself. I deserve zero credit for all of the good in my life, but God deserves all of it. I'm such a wuss, I'm sorry. I gotta man up here and man up and get through this here. I thank Deacon Phil, who was an angel from God, to help guide me down this path. I thank him for his persistence working with me. He demonstrated the love that he had for God and the love that God had for him. We eventually became close friends. I could talk to Phil about Jesus and ask him questions, and he always gave me good answers. And he would always joke around with me too, and tease me a lot. He was one of my spiritual role models. I also thank my wife for putting up with all of my nonsense throughout the years. Her patience and helpful guidance allowed God to work in my life. What a blessing she is. I'm also blessed that I found God. God was always there for me and I didn't even know it. My ego, addictions, and smug attitude created a roadblock between God and me. It says in one of my 12-step books that God could and would if He were sought. Isn't that true? My journey certainly continues one day at a time, and God has been able to keep me sober from all of my addictions today. One of the things that I had learned is that not one of my addictions would ever satisfy me. The addictions always wanted more and more to the point of never ever being satisfied. My addictions that I loved the most in my life were killing me in my relationship with God and others. And my addictions progressively got worse. The more I gave in to the addiction, the more I wanted. There is never any addiction that will ever be satisfied. The addiction only wants more. The only pure satisfaction that I will ever receive is from God and God alone. Also, broken thinking doesn't fix broken thinking. My thinking and living is what got me into trouble. Now we need to let God do the thinking for me. God is the one that saved me, not myself. My mind is a dangerous place a lot of the time. And I could not fix myself without God by my side. Now I understand the importance of why the Catholic Church baptizes children at a young age. It is very important to have a good, solid foundation of faith because it is very easy to turn to the sinful things in this world. God, I thank you for all the good and seemingly bad is necessary for my growth. It is hard for me to believe that my defects and addictions are blessings, and desperately reminds me of how much I need God in my life. God gave me free will to make these choices in life, and I blame no one other than myself for the poor choices that I made. And I take full responsibility for those bad choices. My trials and my tribulations had created a pathway towards Jesus, and I don't want to sound or be like a hypocrite. I still have a lot of issues I need to work through, and my life is far from perfect. This is progress, though, and not perfection. God is the only one who is perfect. And again, I would truly like to thank my wife for the patience and support and the spiritual guidance she has given me throughout my marriage. She easily could have left me at any point in time and probably should have. I would also like to give thanks and pray for Deacon Phil, who has passed on. He was also a person that made my spiritual journey possible. These two people, my wife and Phil, are examples of how the Holy Spirit works through others. I can never sufficiently be grateful for what God has given me. I'm so blessed to have a loving God that is loving, merciful, and forgiving. I need to pray to God every day and thank Him for what He has given me. When I forget to do that, my life becomes unmanageable. Thanks, everybody, for listening to my story. God bless, and pray for me.
We're going to take just a moment. I think when we hear these stories, and thank you, Jim, so much for your testimony and how personal it is, and how beautiful God is to work in your own life, and how beautiful it is to be able to hear that experience and hear that story, to be able to lift you up in our prayers as well. So in between these testimonies, we're going to have just a little bit of quiet and a little bit of music that will play so that we can kind of soak in the things that we have heard. And then in just a moment, then I'll invite everybody to, when the music finishes, to turn to somebody who's around you and maybe reflect a little bit about something that you've heard, something that struck you. Maybe there's something in your own life that you know that God has helped you to overcome as well. Maybe there's something in your own life that you're still looking for God's help to overcome. Maybe there's somebody who's there seated next to you who you want to share that with, so you can pray for each other and help each other. We'll take just a moment. Have some music. Again, we'll do that in between all of these testimonies. If you want to take some notes or just write something down, even just for yourself, feel free to do that. You to take a moment and share with somebody who's nearby you. Maybe somebody that you came with tonight. Maybe you need to slide down the pew and find a friend, and hopefully the name tags will help with that. But we'll take about 3 minutes to just chat a little bit about these. What was impactful for you? What was it that you heard? And is there something that resonates with you in your own life? Is there something that you want to ask your neighbors prayers for this evening? We'll take about 3 minutes to chat about that. Whoever's nearby. just the other day in the scriptures, one of these Sundays, I believe, we heard from St. Paul's letters, where he reminds us that, God shows his love for us, God proves his love for us in this: while we were yet sinners, that Christ died for us. And that is a beautiful thing from Jim's testimony, a reminder to us that, yes, all of us, we are all sinners, and we are all in need of God's grace. And it's not a thing that should cause us to hide away in shame, but it should cause us to have our hearts opened up to God's love, that he does love us, he does desire to draw us closer to him. So this time, for our next speaker, I want to invite up Chris Nagel, who's one of our teachers at our Rosary School, who will talk to us. And again, after her testimony, we'll have a few minutes with some music and just some quiet reflection, and then I'll invite everybody to share with your neighbors.
Good evening. My name is Chris Nagel. Some of you know me and some of you don't. I didn't write an introduction in my testimony, so I'll just say I have 4 children. They all went to Queen of the Rosary. They're all grown up now. My youngest is 18. And it's interesting because as they've grown up, I found myself suddenly struck by feeling kind of unsure about what God's asking me to do. It's not as obvious as it was when they were little. They don't need me the same anymore. They need each other more than they need me, actually. And so in this kind of desperate moment of what am I supposed to do now, I told the Lord in prayer, I will say yes to anything you ask me to do. Like, I'm just going to blanket it like that. I'll say yes to anything you ask me to do. And then I got a phone call from Pete Januso asking if I would speak at the mission. And I really wanted to say no. I really wanted to say no. And but I literally, I said to him, boy, my natural inclination is to say no, but I feel like I have to say yes. So that being said, this is not easy. And I know they've said to us, you could go off your script and say whatever, but it's hard to do that. I was a theater kid, so I don't mind talking in front of people, but I only talk to people about things that are like not so deep and so honest. So I'm going to just read my script probably, so just bear with me for that, because it's a hard thing to do. Anyway, I have undergone a radical change in my life. Not that long ago, I was an angry, fallen away Catholic. When I tried to reflect on my conversion and tried to pinpoint what brought about such a radical change for me, I became overwhelmed by all the different moments and people that impacted me along the way. But if I had to narrow it all down to something I could share in just a few minutes of testimony, I would say that there were 3 main things that helped draw me back to the church and open my heart to the love of God, and still continue to do so. The first would be moments of desperate prayer that led to an abundant outpouring of God's grace. The second, invitations by priests that led me to experiencing the church. And last, but far from least, all the Bernadettes that I met along the way. That will make more sense later after I explain. I was raised Catholic, although we didn't go to Mass regularly. I went to Catholic grade school, and we went to Mass on Christmas and Easter. When it came time for high school, I insisted that I had to go to school with boys. So my mom consented, and that was the end of my Catholic school experience. I became a very rebellious teenager, and then a young adult who rebelled against the church. Then I got married. To a good Catholic boy, by the way, who often says that he married a public school girl. And it was pretty true. I didn't want to get married in a church, but I did so to please my family. We did not have a Mass, just a wedding ceremony, and I firmly refused to bring flowers to Mother Mary. I was determined to prove my strength on my own. I did not need God or the rules that the church would try to impose on me. Then we wanted to have children, and suddenly everything changed. I struggled to get pregnant. And for the first time in my life, I wanted something that I couldn't get or do for myself. For the first time in my adult life, I faced something that I couldn't control. And the moments of desperate prayer began. Once I actually had children, I faced even more moments of desperate prayer because I suddenly cared about something more than I cared about myself. And the responsibility I felt was monumental, as was the reality of my inadequacy to do everything I wanted to do for them as well as I wanted to do it, and to protect them from everything that I wanted to protect them from. Over and over and over again, I found myself falling to my knees, so to speak, and tearfully begging God for help or protection. I still wasn't praying regularly or practicing the faith. I was just desperately asking for what I wanted that I couldn't get on my own. We had our kids baptized, but we did not go to Mass. I just turned to the Lord in prayer at times when I didn't know what else to do, and He never failed to graciously answer with an outpouring of grace. One of those moments of desperate prayer came when my oldest child started second grade. Our oldest started school when we still lived in the city, so we felt we had no choice but to send her to Catholic school. And once we did, we found that we liked it. So we continued to do so even when we moved to the suburbs. There was something we liked about Catholic school, but I was still unsure about how I felt about the church. We went to Mass once in a while, but not every Sunday. And one week that we happened to be at Mass, right at the beginning of that second grade year, I remember being moved to tears as I prayed, sharing my uncertainty about the church with the Lord and asking Him to help my children learn enough to really understand what it is they'll be doing as they prepare for the sacraments. Because I still didn't think I understood, and I knew that I could not teach them. I literally begged Him to make sure they understood what they were doing, and I said this: help them understand what they are doing so that someday when they grow up, if they should choose to walk away from the church, at least they would know what they were walking away from. Because I thought I wanted to walk away, but I didn't know why, and I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew that I wanted more for them. And I believe that prayer was answered by the second important thing that led to this radical conversion for me. Over and over and over again, I see myself simply responding yes to an invitation given by a priest, and in doing so, discovering the church. It's incredibly beautiful. It's like instead of receiving an invitation to a party in the mail and knowing who would be there and what to expect, I feel like I heard these invitations from priests, sometimes from the pulpit, sometimes personally, invitations to daily Mass, invitations to Holy Week, invitations to adoration or time in prayer before the tabernacle, invitations to confession, invitations to consecrations or classes or retreats or events. And every single time I decided to accept an invitation, I discovered so much more than I anticipated. So much more than just the inspiration I felt when I'd hear them preach or teach. So much more it was hard to explain. It was like I walked into this really beautiful gathering. I want to say that it's like a sparkling ballroom full of beautiful people, but it's not materialistic like that. It just feels that beautiful to me. It's so much more than that. It has the feel of beauty and joy and a longing to be there that the vision of a beautiful, sparkling ballroom elicits in me. But it's different. It's the church. The people, the prayers, the liturgies, the mercy, the grace, the comfort, the strength, the church. And it absolutely embraced me and my family in a way that goes beyond words. And then, in saying yes to those invitations, I discovered the third important influence that helped open my heart to the Lord and literally changed my life. The Bernadettes. There's an old movie some of you may have seen about St. Bernadette titled The Song of Bernadette. It was released in 1943, and I had seen it on a list of the greatest movies of all time or something. And I was so surprised to see a movie about a saint on that list, I felt like I had to watch it. And I loved it. It's a great movie, so if you have not seen it, try to look for it. It's a very endearing, very captivating movie. Saint Bernadette was the 14-year-old girl who saw the apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the grotto in Lourdes. There's one scene in the movie where Saint Bernadette is kneeling before her vision of the Blessed Mother, surrounded by a crowd of people who are curious about whatever it is that's happening. People who are there in the hopes of seeing the Blessed Mother also, but no one else can actually see her. Bernadette kneels there, lovingly gazing on Mother Mary, captivated by the vision of her. And suddenly, all the people there who cannot actually see the vision fall to their knees, gazing in the same direction. It's as if they all see what they don't actually see. And the first time I watched that movie, I wept through that scene. I was so deeply moved by the beauty of the faith of those who could not see, as well as the beauty of the impact of not only Bernadette's devotion, but even more so her willingness to surrender to the movement and share the movement of the Spirit in her life and allow what was happening to her to be shared, even at the risk of being misunderstood or looking foolish. As I discovered the church, I also discovered the beauty of so many Bernadettes. I feel like I've been constantly and abundantly blessed by an unending series of encounters with Bernadettes, people whose love and devotion and relationship with Christ and His church have helped me to see what I hadn't seen before. People who have shared their faith and prayers with me along the way and helped me gaze at what I literally couldn't see and long to know what I didn't know. And goodness, I have such an incredible amount of gratitude for the outpouring of grace that God has poured over me through them. Through you. You. So many of you are actually sitting here. And you who are sitting here now, choosing to spend your time seeking to grow closer to the Lord and deepen your faith, you have no idea how often you are Bernadettes to someone. Because many of the Bernadettes who inspired me are people I never even talked to, or people who I shared just a moment in time with at a Mass or a retreat. Sometimes even a simple church parking lot full of cars did it for me, made me wonder about what people were seeking and what they were receiving. And all three of the things that were most influential in my conversion come together at adoration. I discovered the beauty of spending time with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament thanks to the invitations and opportunities given to me by a priest. So now, in the same way that I strive to schedule time to see and to sit and to talk with my best friend, I make a point of scheduling time to see and to sit and to talk with the Lord at adoration. I take my desperate prayers to Him, but now I go often. So it's not just in moments of desperation that I pray. Now I love to just sit with Him, just be with Him. Sometimes to thank Him, sometimes to seek comfort or strength or support or direction, sometimes just to be near Him. And while I sit there, I encounter so very many Bernadettes. People I don't even know, some I may never see again, but many who I will never forget because they changed the way I see Him and deepened my love and devotion for Him simply by allowing me to see theirs. I used to be a scheduled adorer at a church that had adoration in their Eucharistic chapel in the evenings. The chapel was always open for prayer before the tabernacle, but this one evening a week, the Blessed Sacrament would be exposed and sitting in monstrance on top of the tabernacle. One night when I arrived for my hour, the monstrance wasn't there. I found the chapel empty and quiet with just the tabernacle. I was disappointed, but I decided to stay and sit for my hour anyway, telling myself that it shouldn't matter so much to me. Jesus was still there in the tabernacle, and I shouldn't be so demanding or so disappointed. Then a gentleman who was often there with me showed up. We had never talked before, but that night, when he walked in to find no monstrance, he had the same reaction as me. I shared my feelings with him, explaining that I felt demanding and kind of bratty. And then he said, "But it's like standing outside of a palace knowing that the king is inside. It's nice to be near the palace and know that the king is there. But then, when he walks out on the balcony and you can see him and he can see you, oh, there's something really beautiful about that. You're just wishing he was out on the balcony." And he said all that as he's waving to the space where the monstrance would be on top of the tabernacle. I was like, oh my goodness. We both just sat for a little while. I don't see or talk to that gentleman anymore, but he deepened my appreciation of adoration in a way that I will never forget. So if my conversion story could do anything at all, what I wish most is that it might inspire others to pray with or without desperation, entrusting everything you can to the Lord, and to say yes to invitations that might not only deepen your relationship with the church, but even more so might allow someone like me to experience the church more fully by seeing Bernadette in you. And besides willingly sharing your love for the Lord and His church, keep your eyes out for the Bernadettes who might continuously draw you ever closer to Him in prayer and thanksgiving. And I would like to just add that I know so many people often say that they pray for their families or for people they know who've fallen away from the church. And so there's some of you that when I met you at Daily Mass would say you always prayed for souls. And I remember thinking, I don't know if the souls you're praying or you're wishing it was working for are getting the grace, but I did. And so don't ever give up on those prayers, because my family to this day still doesn't believe that I'm different. That's a whole nother testimony. So the other day, while I was trying to prepare for this evening, I found myself alone in an adoration chapel reading Matthew. And I read, "Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe upon him. And plaiting a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they spat upon him, and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to crucify him." And in that moment, I was so grateful to be in that chapel, able to kneel and adore the King out on his balcony. And I pray that the Lord holds on to me by continuing to send me invitations and Bernadettes, so that I might always not only know of his presence, but constantly grow deeper in my love for him and my desire to give everything I have to him. And I thank all of you, especially those of you who have been so patient and generous and charitable with me, for bringing me back to the Lord through your prayers and your example.
sermon, she reminded us of this very important fact that God has a sense of humor, that God will absolutely do that all the time in our own lives, where He will take those things in our life and says, He says, I'll do anything that you ask. And say, oh yeah, how about this? And we'll say, could you pick something else? But He won't, right? But God loves to do that. He loves to turn things around on their heads. Maybe there's a time in your own life that you've experienced something like that, something of God's own sense of humor. Maybe there's a time in your life that you have encountered a Bernadette in your own life, or somebody who has been a Bernadette to you. So we'll take another about 3 minutes or so and just share with somebody who is nearby. Maybe if you want to share just something from Chris's testimony that struck you, if you want to share a moment of God's humor. It's very easy for us to fall into this kind of trap where we think that stories of God's grace present and active in our life, they all have to be stories that are like incredibly dramatic, or there's some sort of big obstacle and you could turn it into a movie, or it's like St. Paul being struck down off the horse or something like this. All these stories of I don't have something that's so grand like this, then maybe I don't have a story of God's presence in my life. And that's simply not true, right? So I'm very personally grateful to Vicki for sharing her story, because it's not that it's not a grand story. It's always a grand story because it's the story of God in your life, but it's something that reminds us that it doesn't always have to be this flashy, and so we don't have to fall into that trap to think, well, maybe there's nothing there. There always is, because God's present and wants to be active in our lives. And there's different ways that shows up. And so maybe a good question for ourselves to turn to somebody and maybe ask ourselves these questions. Is there some sort of experience from my youth or from my family life that stands out to me as was it important as a religious moment? Was there a habit in my family of going to Mass or going to church, or maybe to ask ourselves now, how do I find strength or grace or courage or whatever I need when I go to Mass, when I make time for prayer? It doesn't have to be those sort of grand life-changing stories, but God often changes our lives in very small, in very subtle ways. So what happened with our youth? Is there something that stands out to us there in the way that we were raised? Is there some other way that we feel God's presence on a regular basis, present and moving us in our hearts, in our lives? We'll take a few moments to talk about that. communion or from the rituals and the lives of others in our family, maybe our younger brothers and sisters, but there's something that's very important about that life of family. It's always so beautiful to see when that can be passed on, right? Not just as teachings, but as a way of life, as a way that seeps into every part of everyday life. And I will say here that I did not set the order of the speakers here, and so what we're going to have is sort of a very interesting thing happening where we're now going to invite Trent, because Trent is Vicky's husband, and all the husbands in the audience who sort of relish this internally on this day that we celebrate the feast of St. Joseph, that the husband will have the last word of the two. On the way home, that's the worst, I'm sure. But we've heard from Vicky, and now I invite Trent to come forward and share with us about his story.
You're really causing a stir.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Trent Pincus, and I'm the husband of my beautiful wife, Vicky, and the father of our 3-month-old daughter, Liza. Now, I grew up most of my adolescent years as a Protestant while attending Elk Baptist Church with my parents and grandparents each week. After high school, I went away to Florida for college, quite a far ways away, and began attending a non-denominational Christian church, far away from my parents, plus frequent late Saturday nights with friends. I began attending church less and less. Looking back, my life could have changed drastically. Fortunately for me, God had other plans than for me to be another college-aged guy who fell away from the church. While back at home, working my summer job at Pirates Cove, I met Vicky. I was happy to hear that Vicky was Catholic, even though I knew that there were some differences between what she and I believed. She was attending school at U of I, yet we began a long-distance relationship and didn't look back. Once I returned to school, I began attending Mass regularly. Even from afar, I could always count on Vicky for encouragement. She was always thoughtful by asking how Mass was, and I made sure to attend as often as I could. Fast forward through 2 college graduations, Vicky's grad school graduation, and we got engaged. Around that time, I was part of Queen of the Rosary's RCIA program as a candidate. The RCIA program really helped with my spiritual journey as I began to learn more about the various sacraments. Most surprising was the difference in how Catholics and Protestants celebrate the sacrament of communion. I'll never forget Vicky's reaction when I told her that Elk Baptist had communion once a month, and they passed around trays of oyster crackers and individual servings of grape juice. Many Protestants, meanwhile, believe the literal interpretation of the Bible, yet when it comes to communion, it's simply a symbol. That's always stuck out to me. When I received the Eucharist for the first time at Easter Vigil, it was a surreal experience. The whole evening was very somber, and it's a moment I will never forget. I felt united to Christ in that moment, and I continue to each time I have the Eucharist. It's not just a symbol. For many young Catholics, it seems that they have lost sight of God and the importance of the Catholic sacraments. This is part of why I believe the sacrament of marriage is not respected like it used to be. Couples will get married in the Catholic Church, but never attend Mass outside of Easter and Christmas. To me, it's always felt like the right thing to do to go to Mass. Well, I mentioned earlier that I knew Vicky would be asking about Mass. It was most important for me to desire to go for my own spiritual growth, not to appease anyone. This is what I believe is lacking for young adults, especially males. Many guys my age will always find a way to get to the 8 a.m. Sunday morning tea time. Yet an hour-long Mass that starts at 10:30 is too much. Personally, it's important to put my faith first. I was drawn to the Catholic faith specifically due to the sacraments and overall structure of the church. It's empowering to now be a member of God's first church. I know that my faith is important, and it's crucial to refuel and disconnect from all worldly distractions through the sacraments while at Mass. Now that I'm a father, especially, the stakes are even bigger. Being a father has allowed me to see the big picture. I have prayed much more frequently for both my wife and my daughter. It's more important than ever to put God, my wife, and Eliza as the focal points of my life. I strive to be a great Christian role model for both my wife and my daughter. Through Jesus, the sacraments, and the Catholic Church, I know that I can accomplish anything. Thank you.
It's good to ask ourselves, do we have people in our life who help us live our faith, who help challenge us to grow in our faith? That's one question maybe we can talk about with each other. And maybe another good one that stands out from Trent's experiences. Other ways in which I see myself as a role model of faith for others. Do I let that encourage me by saying, no, I want to try and be better and live my faith more strongly, grow to God, grow closer to Him, because I know that that can be helpful for others in my life. Maybe those questions we can spend a couple minutes asking each other on. His heart, His hands, His voice, His words in our lives and the lives of others who are near us. So we're going to have our final speaker now for the evening, and then after Don will talk and give his testimony. Again, we'll have a little bit of music, a little bit more conversation, and then we'll have a couple other things before we wrap up for the night. So please join me in welcoming Don.
Hello, everybody. My name is Don Kaufhold. I've been a parishioner at St. Julian and Our Lady of the Blessed Sacrament for over 40 years, so I'm probably the oldest person speaking today. I don't know, but young at heart. But I'm going to speak for a few minutes about how my relationship with Christ, especially through the Eucharist, helped me get through a crisis of faith that I experienced. Gosh, the first couple of years that I was married and the first couple of years I was a husband. So I met my wife, Kathy, when I was a junior at the University of Illinois. She was a freshman, so it was love at first sight for me, not so much for her. I had to ask the intercession of Mary quite a few times to get her to come around, but she eventually did. I took a job in the Chicago area after I graduated, And I married Kathy shortly after she graduated, and since she was an Elk Grove girl, we got married here at St. Julian in 1981. And we have 3 kids. Vance is 40 years old, Patrick is 33, and Kate's 29. It's hard to believe. Vance is our biological child, and Kate and Patrick are our children through adoption. So Kathy gave birth to Vance in 1982, and he was born with a rare genetic condition called CHARGE syndrome. It's an acronym, CHARGE. And it's a condition that arrests development during pregnancy. And it results in multiple birth anomalies. So Vance was born with a serious heart condition. He had severe vision and hearing impairments. He had poor fine and gross motor skills, kind of goes on and on, and intellectual limitations. So his heart condition was diagnosed during his first day of life, and we learned about the other issues affecting him over the next few months. So, that was quite a shock to, newlyweds, their first child. And his health as a newborn was extremely fragile. I mean, his condition was diagnosed that first day. They told us about it, and they said that he's got this condition. It's called tetralogy of Fallot. It's where things wrong with the heart. He's fine now. He's pink. He's looking good. But he'll stop thriving at some point before his first birthday. He'll need open heart surgery at that point. But don't worry, he's looking good. Take him home when he turns blue, tape his knees to his chest, and rush him to the hospital. So great, advice to new parents. So it was really difficult. It was really, hard to understand. It was, he'd sleep in a bassinet in the same room with us, the slightest peep, he'd get up and, is everything okay? It was a really difficult thing. We were kind of in shock. We were, confused. We really didn't know what to do. So where am I here? I guess we were just worried, hey, is this kid going to survive his first year of life? We didn't know. It was difficult to do. So this was difficult for me because I'd always prayed for a healthy child. I prayed for, a wife to love and would love me, check. I prayed for a healthy child. This is my first child. I mean, what's wrong? How could God allow this to happen? I mean, and then being born with a heart condition and might not survive was bad enough, but gee, the kid, is legally blind. He can barely see. He doesn't have auditory canals. He's got poor fine gross motor skills. He's going to need, all this therapy to speak, to walk. So it was just like, I was angry with God and, questioning our relationship. So what's a good Catholic boy do? He goes and talks to his priest. Father Diedick was our pastor at the time and spoke to him, and I was all emotional and, filled with doubt and anger, and he tells me to relax and calm down. It's a normal human reaction, normal emotions that I'm feeling. It's okay to be angry with God, so, that was a bit of a relief. But the important thing was not to turn away, to keep talking to God, to tell God, hey, I'm angry. And, I feel betrayed, I feel abandoned. Why? Why'd this happen? And he explained it's hard to understand God's will many times through the life, but you have to maintain faith and you have to maintain trust. So I felt much better after that confession that, I still had some doubts that would pop up here and there. And it was just a difficult time. So what I did, I continued to pray and attend Mass, receive the Eucharist. I asked God to help my son, obviously, my wife, and me, and, kind of to make it through the day. Make it through that week, make it through that month. We'd have, appointments with doctors of various specialties, tests galore, he had a hearing aid at 1 month, open heart surgery at 9 months, complications after that open heart surgery. He had an infection, he had to have the sternum opened up, betadine irrigation, he had problems after that. I mean, it was like, it felt like things were piled on, so that's why it was difficult. But he had, he started getting, we were very fortunate that, God works through others, for sure, and puts you in places where you can get the help that you need. But, he started getting speech therapy as an infant at home. He started getting occupational and physical therapy at home. One of the things that makes me a little sad sometimes is realizing that the programs that provided that for that little feller, as an infant, as a baby, those programs are no longer available because of funding cuts. So, I wonder about that sometimes. But we stuck with it. We attended Mass on a regular basis. We came here. We participated in our parish community. We stayed close to the Eucharist and stayed close to Christ through the Eucharist. And certainly when you're in a situation when you're under so much anxiety and fear, those can drive a wedge in between a couple. And we were very fortunate that God was with us, and kind of, when she'd have a bad day, I'd feel pretty good and talk her up. And when I'd have a bad day, she'd help me out. So, again, definitely see, especially looking back, God working through and helping us deal with everything that we needed to deal with. So we kind of took it, one step at a time, one moment at a time. And so throughout all this, we kind of grew in love and commitment to each other, which I'm very thankful for as well. But it wasn't always easy to feel Christ's presence, especially when we saw one medical thing and another one would pop up. Long stay in the hospital was necessary. And really for me, it was like, God, how can you do this to this little baby, this little kid? I guess I was feeling sorry for myself as well, if I'm totally honest. But that's what really, why did little Vance have to endure so much? And certainly, I've never quite answered that question in my mind, but I can say that we, as a couple, and actually Vance, we're all better people for having gone through that, and we're certainly stronger people, and we really have this fundamental understanding of kind of the joy of living for the instant, because we have a kid who, we still go in and check on him. Is he breathing this morning? Just to make sure, because he continues to have these issues, and his heart problem is his biggest problem to this day. And the things we're going to pray for tonight, he's got a surgery coming up, that the thing will work for him and help him. It's a complex thing, and all the surgeries he's had, it's always a complex thing. But the miracle of this kid, though, is just his, they told us, he'll live to be 12 or 13 years old. He's 40. And he's a miracle. It's unbelievable. And he's one of those kids where you describe all the problems, the issues he has. You get this picture in your mind of, boy, he must be like an invalid, but he's not, He's always been really good at making it seem like he, can do so many more things than he really can. He can't see very well, he can't hear very well, but he somehow overcomes that and somehow has conversations with people. And, he's just an inspiration. I mean, he's a blessing. And, we've grown so much having been his parents and his friends that he's had. He's got friends that he's had since grade school, believe it or not. And just all the things that we have learned going through all that and having a child like that, it's like completely transformed my thinking in terms of, God's presence in your life. I think the footsteps thing, where people say, Christ, He promised if I'd walk with you and I'd be with you, You'd always be with me, even in the toughest times. And, I notice I'm looking down in the sand, and I see when in the worst times of my life, the toughest times, when I see one set of footprints, where the heck are you? And Christ says, my child, I love you and I never leave you. When you saw the single set of footprints, I was carrying you. So, that's where I'm thinking, wow, and it is. I talk a lot to God. Sometimes I don't listen like I should. And it's one of those things where God's voice is not this, is it Elijah who, went to meet God, and God told him to stand over here and wait for him, and there was, this Syrian windstorm that whipped through and cut through the rock, and he says, is that God? And then there was an earthquake, and he says, that, because it's like you're expecting God's voice to be this big thing, and it's more like a little whisper in the wind. And you really have to listen for that. And I probably didn't listen for it as much as I should have, but I think age has had some benefit because you learn from what you go through. But I guess my key message here is, you gotta keep the faith, and you gotta keep the trust, and you gotta learn. And the other thing is, man, God's presence is here now, like right now. He's here right now with us. He's not, if you're worried about the past, or if you got a little child who's got all these medical problems, you're worried about his future, you can't do that. You gotta just, there were times where, it's just, God, help me take the next step. God, help me keep going. Help me make it through the day. Help my son, help my family make it through the day and the week. That's where God is like right there with you, whispering in your ear. He's carried me a few times. He's patted me on the back a few times. He's probably kicked me in the butt a few times. Go on, bro. What's going on? But that's really the message. So what else do I have? Well, I guess the only other thing is, everyone has their own issues to deal with and difficult times. But if you can stick with God, you can stay close to Him, and especially through the sacrament of communion, the Eucharist. He's going to feed your spirit and keep you moving in the right direction. So that's it. Thank you.
Good to ask ourselves these questions and to share with somebody in your life. Is there a time that I have been angry with God? Maybe I'm angry with God right now. Maybe there's something very difficult happening in my life. Is there a time that I've been angry with God? Maybe also too to ask ourselves and to share, has there been a time that I felt the one set of footprints? In other words, has there been a time that I felt that God has been carrying me as I look back on it? There was something in my life that God was carrying me through. Take a few moments and share about that. in your lives. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that, again, all of these things that we are taking, even when they are in our own brokenness and in our own neediness, we recognize that God is present there. And so we want to collect all of these things and offer them to Him. So this time what I'd ask you to do is to just take a moment, if you haven't already, and maybe on one of the pages in that little notebook, write out maybe something that you are praying for right now, something that's going on in your life. And maybe there's something, one of the stories that has inspired you. Maybe you yourself or someone in your family is struggling with some kind of illness or medical issues. Maybe in your family you're wondering, okay, how do I spur my children, my grandchildren to live a life of faith? And you're wondering about something else that's happening, or how you can grow in your own faith, in your own battle against addiction, against sin, whatever it is. But take a moment and write something down on your card. And then go ahead and tear that, once you finish, tear that out of the notebook. And then in a moment, I'll kind of stand up front here with this basket that's up there. And then we'll invite everybody forward, basically like it's a communion. And we'll come forward and we'll place these prayer intentions in this basket. Out here, the host will be out here so we can see God face to face. The King will be out on his balcony, as we heard. And And also we'll have several priests here for confession, for reconciliation, so that we can really be unburdened, so that we can be free, so that we can very fully know the love that God has for us. And then on Wednesday night, we'll gather together again for like an instructional mass, a teaching mass, right? Because there's so much that is there when we celebrate the Mass, and it's very easy to say, oh yes, well, I go to Mass all the time, or it sort of just becomes habit, and I sort of say these things sort of robotically now, right? Like, and I will tell you, I've been a priest now 7 years or something like this. I still, if I don't have 100 other people saying the Nicene Creed, it's a good shot that I'm not going to remember it, right? I need the community there. Sometimes it's like that. We sort of go through the motions, we get so used to it, we're on autopilot, but to have that time to stop and to think and to pray, and maybe better understand what it is that God is calling us to be, who God is calling us to be, and understanding how He will bring us there. Before our final prayer, again, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our speakers. Thank you for your witness. Thank you for your willingness. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing, especially to share from things that are so personal in our lives that touch us very emotionally. So thank you for your strength and for your courage in speaking to us your stories of grace this evening. Also, can't let it pass without thanking Deb, who's been playing for us on the piano, our little interludes and everything else. So thank you for being here. There are many people also who helped to put this together. Our committee with Therese Bergman, with Kathy Casserton, with Pete Januso, and with Mary Ellen Allenstein in our parish office, who's put together all these folders and materials, and of course all our volunteers who helped do that. So there's many people who helped bring this evening together, and I'm very thankful to all of you for the work that you have done to bring us together, to have this time to be open to the Lord and His words. So let's turn now to this backside of the sheet for night 1. We see this prayer, this daily consecration prayer from St. Peter Julian Emard. And we'll pray this together, recognizing that we're in this church dedicated in His honor. He is titled as Apostle of the Eucharist, and so we want our hearts to be united with Him towards our God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, in the spirit of adoration, thanksgiving, reparation, and petition, I offer you the actions and sufferings of this day, in union with the Eucharistic heart of Jesus, in order to render to that your heart dwelling among us, the debt of justice and love due to His august presence, and moreover to offer to your divine majesty through Him, with Him, and in Him, the glory that He Himself renders here on earth. Lastly, I make each offering to obtain, by means of that almighty mediator, peace for the church, salvation for our country, and all the other graces for which we call on you. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Feel free to stick around and have some conversations as well. If you wish, if you still need to drop off another prayer intention, that basket will